If you're in the EU fandom, or even the Star Wars community in general, you may have heard about the comments made by the current Lucasfilm president, Kathleen Kennedy. She doesn't come out publicly very often, but last week she gave an exclusive interview with Rolling Stone, primarily to promote the Disney Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. But at the beginning of the interview, her comments about the lack of source material came across as extremely tone-deaf to fans of the expanded universe, now known as Legends. The interviewer asks, Jurassic World Colin Trevorrow was stated to write and direct Episode 9 before you brought J.J. Abrams back in. Is this final entry in the trilogy a particularly hard nut to crack? To which Kathleen responds, every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels. We don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what the next iteration might be. Now, I don't have to remind anyone that, under Kathleen's leadership, the hundreds of novels and comics that comprise the totality of the EU were rendered non-canon to make way for the Disney rebooted sequel trilogy. Giving Kathleen the benefit of the doubt, she was probably just referring to the fact that the sequel movies aren't relying on adaptation of a previous work, like the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings movies. However, complaining about the lack of source material for these movies is just kicking the loyal fans of the expanded universe while they're down, and many would argue that these movies would be far better if they were an adaptation of the EU. Never forget that the original canon of Star Wars was thrown away so that we could have the sequel trilogy, so that J.J. Abrams could have his mystery boxes, so that Rian Johnson could subvert your expectations, and so that this trilogy could be pushed out as quickly as possible without a cohesive structure so that Disney could make a quick buck. Remember, these movies didn't come from a creator struck with inspiration on how to continue the Star Wars universe. They were announced the moment that Disney bought Lucasfilm and executives in a boardroom got dollar signs in their eyes. You could say that Kathleen Kennedy just wasn't thinking about the EU when she made these comments, but that's precisely the problem. Kathleen Kennedy never talks about the EU, or how she thought how great it was. It was just an obstacle that had to be ignored for this new canon to exist. To prove that, let's look at another interview from 4 years ago on Slashfilm.com. The interviewer asks, some fans were upset over the abandonment of the expanded universe, or relegating it to not being canon. Can you walk us through the process of how that comes to be? Before I give Kathleen's response, I would like to give my thoughts as an upset EU fan. As I've stated before, I don't care that they call it non-canon, or Legends, or whatever, because I will always view it as the true canon, as Lucasfilm licensing did back in the day, officially, and no Disney rewriting of history, or online haters who say it was never canon to begin with, will ever change that. That's my feelings on the matter. Your mileage may vary. So, anyway, Kathleen says, well, George allowed the expanded universe to really go its own way, and some of it was extraordinary and really well done, and some of it less so. Did you catch that? Even though it wasn't part of the interviewer's question, she had to question the quality of it, almost as if she was justifying why they got rid of it. But it doesn't really mean anything. I can say it right now. Hey guys, did you know that the EU had really good stories, and some of it less so? God forbid that the new canon has really great stories, and some of it less so. She is right about how George let the EU go on its own way, but unlike Disney's canon, George, the creator of Star Wars, still had final say on what happens in the EU. If he said no to a story, then it didn't get made. That's why Dark Empire is a comic about Palpatine returning in a clone body, and not about someone impersonating Darth Vader by wearing his armor. Kathleen continues. But it didn't follow any narrative structure, and we felt with all the development that was going on in all these different areas would make things too chaotic. It didn't follow any narrative structure? What the hell does that mean? Seriously. What a slap in the face to people who worked on the original canon. What a slap in the face to Pablo Hidalgo and Leland Shee and everyone whose job it was to keep the EU consistent. Especially when this is another answer that doesn't mean anything. The new canon is pretty much doing what the EU did. Several new comics and books, games, TV shows, and multiple different eras of the Star Wars saga. How does that have narrative structure while the old canon, which did the same thing, apparently didn't? And talking about narrative structure in the sequel trilogy, maybe you shouldn't be throwing stones at the EU in your pretty glass house, especially when you can't maintain the consistency from movie to movie. And we didn't abandon it because we thought something was wrong with it. We abandoned it because it had gone in too many different directions without any oversight by George, and that's something we're trying to rectify. So the concept of the expanded universe is similar to what we're continuing to do, but within a bit more structure. Another lie. The EU did have oversight from George. Maybe not 100% of the time, sure. He's a busy man and maybe didn't have time to read every book and comic and sign off on every sentence. Again, that's what Leland Chee, Pablo Hidalgo, and many others were there for. The thing you are actually rectifying is that your canon has no oversight from George. You keep saying George this, George that, but you're not honoring him. You dropped him at the earliest possible convenience, and you didn't use his story treatments. George's vision of the sequels were going to be about Anakin's grandchildren.
You know, the original saga was about the father, the children, and the grandchildren. And, I mean, that's not a secret to anybody. It's even in the novels and everything.
And if you weren't certain about the context of that clip, he's talking about the EU. But my favorite part about this whole interview is basically she straight up admits to abandoning the expanded universe. Even though all we really want is for the EU to continue as an alternate timeline to the new canon. I want both new canon and legend stories to be made. I don't want one to exist at the expense to the other. That's how you upset the fans. You know, the fans. The ones that the interviewer brought up in his question, but you didn't actually address in your answer. But the real difference between Kathleen's Slashfilm interview and the Rolling Stone interview has been the response. It was pretty lonely being an EU fan back in 2014 and 2015. We got dumped on for not being excited for the new movies, and for actually caring that our continuity was thrown out. But now, 4 years of the new canon and 4 Disney Star Wars movies later, I think people have finally caught on to what Kathleen is really about, and I think they've finally caught on about how great the expanded universe really was. The response to Kathleen's comments has been huge. Whether people have made memes or video responses about it, it's truly amazing to see so many people defend the EU.
There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels. Well, good goddamn, Kathy. If only there were a vast trove of ancillary material accrued over an epoch spanning multifarious media from home video to video games to comics to an Amazon fucking rainforest worth of paperback fiction novels broadening the mythos of motherfucking Star Wars for the better part of 5 fucking generations, jackass.
We don't have comic books.
What the fuck is it with you?
Marvel published Star Wars comics from 77 to 86. Dark Horse published comics from 91 to 2014 when Disney pulled the license from them. Dark Empire, Knights of the Old Republic, Shadows of the Empire, Dawn of the Jedi, Star Wars Tales, Star Wars Republic, Star Wars Empire. There are thousands of comics to choose from, written and drawn by hundreds of people. Fantastic stories. Just a well of material people would love to see on screen. And you don't know anything about that?
The worst thing that she said here was that there is no source material, that they have no comic books and no 800-page novels. She was one of the people that got rid of 30+ years worth of content. She helped annihilate 3 decades of lore from comic books, novels, amazing video games. Did she forget the expanded universe even existed in the first place?
And if you look behind me, it's not easy to see when I'm sitting here. Over 100 novels, hundreds of comic books. I've got tons of trade paperbacks here. I've been talking about the Legacy era. This was your source material. You could have used it. You had it. I cannot believe she came out and said that. That is absolute insanity.
Not only did Disney have Lucas's outline, but they also had access to a plethora of novels, video games, comic books about Star Wars. They had source material, the comic books, and they had lengthy novels, all of which would have been better than anything we got. Seriously, what are you thinking?
True passionate Star Wars fans created and wrote some of the best Star Wars stories of all time within the expanded universe. And it not only got wiped away, but now the president of Lucasfilm apparently doesn't recognize it ever existed.